Directed by Ron Howard. It says it's on Sling. I'm gonna look around and see where else it's on. I don't use Sling personally, so I want to make sure it's available for you all. And if not, I'll either find copies to let you borrow, or I'll pick something different. And then the last one is The Tree of Life, which came out in 2010, directed by Terrence Malick. So hope you will get to see that. And fun fact, I worked on the marketing for that movie too. So there you go. But let us begin. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Let us pray. God, we give thanks for this time together. We give thanks for springtide. Even though the weather is brisk, we are feeling the Easter spirit of new hope, new spring, and new possibility. Lift up our conversation and send your spirit to guide us this day and always. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. All right, Superman. Well, I came I could, like I said, spend weeks and weeks on this, but I'm limited in time, so I've committed myself to just 4 clips. But I do want you to know that this is special for me because I was raised with this movie in a delicate time in the early 80s, so that's me on the left when you see that picture of my little brother wearing the Michael Jackson t-shirt. We did not have cable. There was only 3 or 4 stations that we got, on it. So, but we did have a VHS player, the new technological wondery of 1981, 82. And so my parents were like, what will we do with this child, while we have to, fix food and do other things? We'll just put on Superman and we'll just play it over and over again. And nowadays kids probably your grandkids are watching things on iPads, and I know my nephews who are now that age in the pictures, they are all watching Frozen, Encanto, Moana, things like that over and over and over again. So it's kind of the same concept. Mine was Superman. But as I got older and I grew up with it, and especially as I went into ordained ministry, I said, boy, there really is a lot more going on beneath the surface here, and sometimes not quite beneath the surface, sometimes quite overtly. And that just enriched the experience for me. Phyllis and I were emailing earlier this week, and you can't separate the story of the actor who played Superman now from the experience of watching it. For one, because one of those few moments in art where the person cast for the role was the most perfect choice for the role. Roger Ebert, famous Chicago critic, of course, famously said, he looks so much like Superman from the comics, or your picture of Superman, that it's a fate I would not wish on anybody. And Reeve would come to agree with that, I think, because he had a lot of trouble trying to break typecasting. He really wanted to play other roles and test his acting limits, because Juilliard trained actor. And he, sorry, I'm just bringing up the disc. Later in 1995, he had the horrible freak accident on a horse and was made quadriplegic. And then, as to be expected, he took the mantle of the character that he was so known for and transformed it into, I will be use my celebrity, much in the same way Michael J. Fox continues to do for Parkinson's. I will use my celebrity to draw attention to this. The other would be Elizabeth Taylor with the AIDS research, and Elton John as well. So Christopher Reeve just became, just indelible force for good, particularly in the realm of stem cell research, and his foundation continues to raise tons and tons of research money for stem cell research too. Okay, I'm saying all that because later this year, it just must be something in the water, a new documentary called Super Space Man, or Super Slash Man, the Christopher Reeve story, is a documentary that was just premiered at the Sundance Film Festival and is coming out in theaters in September. It was purchased by Warner Brothers at the festival, so that's good, because Warner Brothers owns the copyright on Superman, so that's great. And Reeve's 3 grown children are all participants in that documentary too. So look for that, and maybe I'll arrange we can do a screening or something where I'll go go out to the theater to see it. Boy, I could tell you so many notes and details about this film. I'm gonna put it on play in the background while I talk, so you don't have to just stare at me. You know, I wish I could talk and have the music at full blast, but if you did get a chance to watch it, or maybe you're just reminiscing from the 70s, this was a pretty landmark film because, you know, we only had at the time, in the terms of movies that are blockbuster style movies, we had Jaws in 1975 by Steven Spielberg. We had Close Encounters of the Third Kind the next 2 years later, 1977, also Spielberg. We had, of course, Star Wars in May of '77, which changed everything. And then Superman right after it. And of course, John Williams had his fingers all over the scores of all those movies, you know, and more. Ironically, he was put in at the last minute. The original composer was going to be Jerry Goldsmith, who also was very prolific at the time. But schedule changes on Superman kept happening. The movie ended up in production for almost 2 years. It was announced 5 years before, when the filmmakers, Alexander and his son Ilya Salkind, they were Hungarian Mexicans, they had done the Three Musketeers with Michael York, and then had decided to make Superman, and that had never been done before. The only type of film like it was the Batman TV show, and everyone thought that would be campy. What are we going to do about this? So when they cast it, they wanted it to be big and cinematic, so they cast Marlon Brando, who would do anything for a paycheck at that time, but had just come off The Godfather and Last Tango in Paris, so he was still quite famous. But he was in that new phase of his career, where he was definitely older and a bit heavier. And then, well, you see, wait, hold on, I'm right here, I can't help it. I'll let it dull roar in the background. Notice Christopher Reeve gets after billing credit because he was an unknown.
I read that one of the first choices to play Superman was Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yes, exactly.
And Marlon Brando said no.
Yeah, I'm not gonna.
Superman had an accent.
Exactly. Yeah, the casting for Superman was legendary. They had Marlon Brando, they had Gene Hackman in, and then who was going to play Superman? They went to Redford, they went to Dustin Hoffman, they went to about everybody they could think of, Steve McQueen, all the big stars of the 70s. They all said no, and then also they hired the director, Richard Donner, who had just done The Omen, and Donner said, I can't imagine any of those guys in tights flying. Like you will not, you'll just go there, that's just Paul Newman up there flying around, right? So he said, it's gotta be an unknown, and the casting director, Lynn Stallmaster, went out to the local theater in New York, and that's where they found Christopher Reeve in a small off-Broadway play with Katharine Hepburn. He auditioned, he was 6'4", but like weighed 160 pounds or something, it was skin and bones. And he said, I promise you I can gain the weight. And they dyed his hair black, and he put on the weight, studying under the man who played the body of Darth Vader. But they ran out of time and had to start shooting the movie before he was done building up. So actually throughout the movie, his weight fluctuates because he keeps, it's all right, John, I'll get it. His weight fluctuates sometimes depending on when it was shot. And you also get locked in with these problems of you've got Brando for a short amount of time, paid a fortune, small fortune. And they had to start shooting, and so that's kind of what happened. All of these effects in the movie pre-computer, so everything had to be created from scratch. They designed their own flying mechanism because the marketing of the poster said, "You'll believe a man can fly." And what they ended up creating was this idea that you shot something as a plate in the background, and that moved, so kind of swinging through the city, and then you put the actor on wires. And then the actor did all the hard work, which was Reeve, being a hang glider in real life, knew that he had to bank his body almost like swimming too. And he brought all of that physicality to the part. Okay, you just saw the credit. Story of Mario by Mario Puzo. Now watch all the screenplay credits. So Mario Puzo wrote The Godfather, wrote the first draft of the script, 2 movies, 400 pages long. Then it was a rewrite by David and Leslie Newman to add more of the romance with Lois and Clark and get some of that dialogue in better shape. Robert Benton, who did Places in the Heart, came in and did another rewrite. But the final rewrite was hired by the director, and he didn't get a credit. His name is Tom Mankiewicz. His family was very known in Hollywood, and he had been secretly doing script doctoring on James Bond movies without getting credit. So Richard Donner and Tom Mankiewicz, who were good friends, rewrote the script from top to bottom, and this is where the stage where the spiritual allegory was dialed up. Now the character Superman had in it, because it was written by two teenage Jewish boys, this Moses allegory that the parents on Krypton put him in the proverbial basket and float him down the Nile to safety, right? And that's where I want to go with this this first sequence here with Brando, so here we are on the famed planet Krypton. This was a big part of the idea of the script. If this is a movie, this is a cinematic experience, we've got to tell the fable. That's what Donner and Mankiewicz decided to say. This is King Arthur. This is, this is biblical. And he intentionally divided the movie into three parts. Thought of it in three kind of almost genres in one. The first one is they're almost speaking with British accents, in fact, even Brando too. And it's like they're on some kind of heavenly realm. It's very Old Testament-y, biblical. They speak in a really stilted English. And it's all shot almost as if they're all working inside a crystal of some sort, part of the production design. The second act is like a Norman Rockwell painting. It's down in Kansas, and everyone's ma and pa and those things, and we'll watch a clip of that. And then the third act is the comic book, right? So, when you have Christians taking over the writing of the screenplay and adapting it, they saw the metaphor not just of Moses, but of God sending Christ to earth. And so this is the scene we're going to watch here. But before we get into this, Mike, I wonder if you would read, you're waiting for your big line, from the Gospel of John, and this might sound a little familiar to you. Go for it. This is John chapter 3, starting at verse 11.
Very truly I tell you, we speak of what we know and testify to what we have seen. Yet you do not receive our testimony. If I have told you about earthly things and you do not believe, how can you believe it if I tell you about heavenly things? No one has ascended into heaven except the one who descended from heaven, the Son of Man. And just as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up, that whoever believes in him may have eternal life. For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, so that everyone who believes in him may not perish, but have eternal life. Indeed, God did not send the Son into the world to condemn the world, but in order that the world might be saved through him.
Beautiful. Thank you. Sounds a little familiar, doesn't it? The idea of Superman, the character, as a Jesus-type figure is now, and the same for many superhero characters, which is now a genre that I think Hollywood is beaten to death. I think studios would agree with me on that statement now. We've kind of run its course, and now they're kind of reassessing where do we go from here. But this was before that. This is almost 50 years before that. And the idea of Jesus being a kind of a parallel to the arc of the Superman character was really a novel idea. And so Mankiewicz and Donner just really wanted to dial that up a little bit and say, well, think of Jor-El the Father as God, and he's sending his only son down to humanity, and really views him in a conversation with his mother, played by Susanna York, famous British actress, the late Susanna York. Basically has this beautiful soliloquy here saying farewell to the child, but painting it in a much more spiritual Judeo-Christian kind of way. So we'll hit play here, and I think the subtitles are on.
So what happened
Thoughts
to
on
the
that?
little boy
What happened to the little boy?
when he grew up?
The actor?
Yeah.
He does he goes to conventions and signs autographs and stuff
Really?
now. For real, yeah. And Metropolis, Illinois has a Superman festival I've yet to go, but it's in early June, so maybe he'll be there, yeah.
Question.
Yeah.
Jalal had an S on his
Yeah,
shirt.
what's the story with that?
Yeah,
In the quest to make this and adapt it as a movie, when they came up with the production design to be all crystalline, which is just absolutely beautiful, they also were working on the costumes and decided we're stuck with a few things about the character. We're still stuck with it, which is he's dressed like a circus performer in the 1930s by design. He's wearing tights and a cape and everything, and he's quite what do I want to say? Awkwardly, he's got his underwear on his outside of his suit. Which again, because of Christopher Reeve's performance, you kind of forget about it. You don't draw attention to how he's dressed so much because he wears it with such confidence. But when you get to something like the S, it stands for Superman, but they said in this film, why don't we add just a more resonant layer and make it a family crest, like a symbol that happens to look like an S. And so in another scene, you see all the other elders of Krypton talking to Brando, and they all have different symbols on their chests. And they sometimes look like English letters and sometimes they don't. So that's kind of the origin of the S here. And then later in the movie, Lois Lane, played by Margot Kidder, comes up with the name Superman independently. Well, skipping ahead a little bit, little Kal-El grows up to be Clark Kent. And boy, I have to skip over so many rich scenes, but one of them here is now the teenage Clark, who is not allowed to be raised by the farmers Jonathan and Martha Kent, straight out of the comic book. But suddenly here you have, first of all, another allegory of adoption, and you have two people who cannot have children. That sounds very biblical, doesn't it? They're past their age. They're a little bit more age of his grandparents. And she even says, I've prayed and prayed for the good Lord to see fit to give us a child, right? And then basically a child drops out of the sky for them. So again, all of these things were there for the taking in the lore, in the legend, the myth, and the filmmakers just said, well, let's move that to the forefront, because that's quite important. And so, as I've said before, probably in a sermon somewhere, that the person who Clark becomes, the person who Superman grows up to be, is not so much his biological parentage, but the adoption of the Kents, and what the values, the old American values of just being a good person. This is starting to get into the themes that are in today's readings today. That is what makes Clark who he is, and who makes Superman who he is. And so that is all crystallized here, crystallized, pun intended, with this conversation with his father, played by the great Glenn Ford. Okay, wait a minute. French won't help you. Oh my my gosh, every single, I got Norwegian on here. First of all, production notes, if you will. That is not Christopher Reeve. That is another actor named Jeff East, who is blonde, so he's wearing a wig, not the best wig either, and a fake nose to match Christopher Reeve's. And to make matters worse, the poor actor's voice was dubbed at the last minute by Christopher Reeve because his voice was too deep. He's supposed to be playing 18 years old, you know. So the poor actor didn't find out until he went to the premiere, and the filmmakers forgot to tell him. Oops. So, but that's all right. He's still in the movie, and he's too also plays the circuit of going to sign his autograph at Superman and comic book conventions and all. So a wonderful, tender moment that many of today's filmmakers who sometimes have their fingers in the Marvel universe or DC movies, or even say the Christopher Nolan Batman films, that they point to this film and this sequence as the major influence on them, because it just adds that gravitas to the character that nobody was begging for. But once you add it in, you go, well, wait a minute, you know, I know we were talking about Superman here, but there's some real meat on this bone of a very human character, much like the one we encounter in the Gospels. And we imagine this scene is like a lost scene from the Gospels where maybe Joseph talks to a young Jesus and just says, you have these abilities, but you've got to use them for the right purposes and all. So you get almost essentially a midrash, as Jewish would say, that is like a wonderment of what would that be like. And so this takes the character into the rest of the film, who is struggling with two truths at the same time. One is from his his original father, his biological father, who is saying it is forbidden for you to interfere with human history. You know, that was on a recording on his spaceship over and over and over again. You cannot, and a valid thing too, you know, you cannot go meddling into, you know, trying to interfere with them. You're there to just be a model. And then you have his earthly parentage saying, you're here for a reason. You know, you didn't just drop out of the sky for some reason. And from their pious point of view, I mean, they find him coming home from church one day just as a kicker. And so they're all dressed, you know, he and Martha are dressed up for church. It's not lost on us that they are, you know, God-fearing people, for lack of a better word, you know. And here they are thinking, what an opportunity this you have with these powers. Not as a teenager tends to think, why can't I play football? You know, because you might hurt the other kids. That's why. Let me just pause there. I'm doing a lot of the talking. Things you're noticing or questions, or even if they're off topic, it's totally fine.
One of the things I noticed on this particular little clip, we, and maybe among ourselves, we hold it like ourselves, we run into a lot of people who hold that view, the theological view, that God has a plan for us. And generally we identify, and I might be wrong about this, but I think generally we identify that with Presbyterians and Calvinists. And I'm just saying, that this is an example of somebody having to write something, and pretty much whatever you come up with, seen in historical perspective, says something about the people who, like, what do they believe in God? So there are people who you see them walking around in normal life saying, well, don't worry that you had this terrible thing happen to you. God has a plan for you.
Right.
And I'm not criticizing that.
No,
I'm just
not at
saying,
all.
but not all people hold that theology that there's
Exactly.
a plan for you.
It's a great point.
I was also thinking about Star Trek and the Prime Directive.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly.
And that was the underlying bottom line. that
Can you
don't-
define what the prime directive
Oh,
is
the
for
Prime Directive
the
is-
non-Trekkies?
Right.
I'm sure she can.
Right, the Prime Directive is in Star Trek.
Yeah,
And
describe the Bible
the
here.
rule is, you can go to these different planets, but you are not to interfere.
Right.
And you can help the people, but you cannot interfere, and that's from the Academy,
Right.
and they're all Star Trek officers.
What a great point. I'd forgotten
Right,
that.
yeah, the Prime Directive is one of the underlying, rules,
Bless you.
It's
rules
Prime.
of
Yeah.
Star Trek.
It's Prime.
Right, it's Prime Directive, right.
It's a very much like like a moral clause in some
Right.
way, of just, know your place, stay in your lane,
Right.
which is totally, it's valid. It's commendable. And Mike, you're right too about the God has a plan. I think for a lot of us, it's fluid. We probably vacillate between, I don't know if God's really got a plan. And then there are other times where you go, maybe God does have a plan, and I've been working through it without realizing it, I think that internal struggle is happening a lot. More to the point of today's readings about the Good Shepherd and what Mike read too. We have kind of bookending the sequence where Brando, when he's still alive, tells the child, the infant, who probably not processing the information at all, that they will be somehow connected spiritually forever, and that he is the extension of the Father on the planet. Now we get a recording, this neat kind of plot device where you can still squeeze out more Marlon Brando juice from a lemon for the film, and yet it's a recording. It's not a ghost, but the recording has anticipated the questions that the child will ask, and is there to kind of guide him on his journey. A journey that takes about 12 years of kind of study, basically effectively our 40 days in the wilderness, right? Instead of going out to the Jordanian wilderness, he's marched up to the North Pole so he can be in private, and has built this fortress of solitude where he can commune with his late father and learn more about who he's supposed to be. And we're gonna play this sequence. Yeah, go ahead.
I also thought when Marlon Brando was saying, whatever I am, I'm giving to you, and I thought, what about the mother?
Oh no, it's
I
funny
mean-
you say that
I mean,
because
why shouldn't he
You're right.
embody all the good things from her? Why
Exactly.
shouldn't that be obvious?
you're right. And in the sequence where she comes into the room with the baby, she has some dialogue. We just didn't have time to watch it. Where I think it should be okay. Where she's worried about the human child, not she. He's worried about he's going to be fast. He's going to be able to defy gravity. He'll be safe, and she goes, he'll be alone. He'll be isolated. He won't. He'll be different, odd, and you do get the motherly concern of she's worried about the human, even though they talk about Earth, and it's like they're primitives and all these things. The actress though came to Tom Mankiewicz on the set as they were shooting that sequence, and she walked over to him and said, after Brando had done that monologue, which by the way, he does it by reading cue cards, and his script is written on the child's diapers. Because Brando at the time refused to memorize his scripts, right? So he did not like to work. But he was very supportive of the project. Once he read the script, he was like, oh, never mind, this is a good movie. I'm proud to be a part of it. Anyway, he does the whole script and she doesn't say anything. And then she walks over to the writer who's standing on set watching, and she goes, and pardon the expression, but she goes, so what does the mother give him? The mother gives him, as in nothing, you know, she gives him nothing. And he said, when you're making $25 million or whatever it is, you know, for 3 minutes of screen time or something, then you get to give him all the things you want. But for now, Brando has to do all the dialogue. And she's like, all right, over there. So you're not wrong to see it. There's a little bit of patronism going on there. So ironically, come up and since the theatrical release of the sequel, Superman 2, when there's a whole nother plot line about whether to give up his powers or not, he communes with his mother instead, who helps him out. Okay, so this is a sequence that's kind of straight out of 2001 a little bit, and while it looks like we're traveling through space, it's really a time of study and reflection on who he is and what he's there to do, with his father narrating from these recordings. And you'll see that we do have the text up on screen, so you'll be able to see it. And we get a return to that John 3 theology, in case you missed it the first time. So as you get the major theological statement, it also marks kind of an end point for that act, as now he is to go out into the world commissioned, you know, on his mission. What I was saying over that, if you couldn't hear, as you hear the score really chime in for the first time, that was Christopher Reeve's first day in costume in the harnesses to fly. And the crew and the other actors that were there on set were gathered around to watch because they were curious to see how this is going to work. His was only supposed to fly towards camera and straight and then kind of move off. But again, when Reeve comes at camera, he instinctually bangs like a hang glider. And you could see that shadow falls over his face as he does it because they weren't lit for that area of the screen as he turned. But the movement was so natural and so perfect, you know, and just, I think seeing him in costume and the cape was flapping all artificially, that they just all started, they say they started crying and just clapping and, you know, applauding on stage. Not the only time they would do that. The other one was during the scoring stage when John Williams unveiled the march, which he intentionally wrote it to sound like almost as if you could hear a dialogue saying Superman, da, da, da. And the filmmaker was so excited by it, couldn't believe what he was hearing, that he ran out and applauded at the end, and the orchestra was applauding John Williams, but he screwed up the take, so they had to do it all over again. Because he was just going like, you're a genius, you're a genius. And then you have Reeve showing up for the first time as Clark Kent. Just a production note here. He admits that he was stealing a little from Clark Gable and bringing up Baby as in his performance of Clark. And you really get what's unique about this superhero, which is that he is the superhero at all times. The secret identity of Clark Kent is the performance. That is the mask. He does not wear a mask. This is his interpretation of humans in some ways. And we've got a little time. Let's just let this play out because it's so good. Yeah, go ahead, Phyllis. This has nothing to do with anything. It's just a good scene, yeah.
Well, this question has nothing to do with anything either. I was reminded of the things that sort of troubled me along the way.
Sure.
One of them, what did he eat all the time he was in the desert?
Right.
That's a long time, and there's not a 7-Eleven.
They
No
have
more
carry
just
out.
the one.
So that's one.
No carry out, no DoorDash.
And the other
Yeah.
one was, when you take off from ground,
Yep.
you know, you push off, how do you keep it going? How do you change?
Right,
How
exactly.
do you change
The
direction?
physics is leave something to be desired, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Cause
Okay.
it must be the cape. The cape
I
has
said
little,
it.
little rotors and things that turn. You're right, but he does, but again, Reeve would, all we had was George Reeves, the TV show version. And he would run and jump and hit literally a trampoline, and then it would propel him out the window, and then he'd land on a mattress, right? But he laid on a stick board like this. They did a similar process for Reeve where they had him tied in the waist, but they made a body meld for him and for Margot Kidder that went from their knees up into their torso, and then they covered the mold with, and that had the harness and straps. Then they covered the mold with the uniform. So they had they said they had about 12 different Superman costumes for different things, standing, posing, close-ups, all of those things. And when they basically, the two of them would just sit in the mold, and when they'd sell cut, they would just kind of drape their arms down, and she'd pull out a book and start reading, and he'd stay in character, and she'd be like, calm down, So they were very much like brother sister. This was not like a real romance.
I wondered why he flew like this. I thought
Yeah.
Wonder Woman was like this.
Right.
and he's
Exactly.
Like this, and I thought, that's strange. He goes with
Yeah, and he'll
this.
do a pose like this, and then he'll kind of put one arm around, and almost like he's steering a car a little bit. So there's some method to the madness, but yeah, it doesn't really give us much about physics. But he would do a running jump sometime to kind of leap off or push off. So we have Margot Kidder, who is hired here, and really her breakout role, the late Margot Kidder. All of these actors are dying now. And she and Reeve just had an undeniable chemistry that was something evocative of Tracy and Hepburn. Let alone the fact that he kind of looks like a young Rudolph Valentino too. So, and that's Jackie Cooper from the Little Rascals, right? Playing Harry White. Only because you're indulging me, and we'll just let this fun scene play out. And just notice, it feels like a completely different movie from the first two acts. off taking care of Lois, who is suffocating from this earthquake as well. So what if, anybody remember what Martha, neat connection there, Martha, the sister of Lazarus, says to Jesus when he does show up? If you had been here, my brother would not have died, right? So that's often read at funerals, a really important moment. And what does Jesus do? He takes it. You know, he hears that and he acknowledges that grief and that pain, and then works to make something new out of it. I can't undo what I've done, but I can make something new. Well, similar here, when he does get to her in time, it's too late, and for all his powers, it's history repeating itself. When his father, played by Glenn Ford, dies of a heart attack, he says at the grave, "I have all these powers and I couldn't even save him." And here it is happening again. I have all these powers and there was nothing I could do about it. And so in a fit of rage, let's gotta watch this performance here. And again, the romance being set up the whole movie makes this pay off. And then he goes, there must be something I can do. So here's our resurrection moment. you go, arms out. That's all I had. What are your thoughts or impressions, or maybe things I didn't have a chance to get to about it all?
This
Yeah,
is just
Jesse.
silly, but I loved it whenever Superman would fly by a building, all the women would go to
Yeah,
the window.
that's right.
They were all in love with him.
Which is exactly what would happen,
Rock star.
probably, yeah.
Right.
Right. I can also just tell you fun stuff too, but I did think of this legitimately for the resurrection sequence, and particularly the Lazarus one as the connection, because, you know, even though Jesus is the one who was resurrected, and there are further Superman films, the remakes, the ones which I've kind of disowned, I'm too much related, I'm emotionally connected to this one. But all the more recent ones, they sometimes go for that Christ-like imagery, and they do it for other superhero films too. And they kind of do it too much, I think, kind of overdone. This is a lot more subtle and gives you a little bit more to just ponder and think about. And I love the idea that, like Jesus raising Lazarus, you know, Superman kind of goes, well, can I defy, you know, physics and gravity and all those things? Yeah, in this instance I will, right, yeah, because I have that ability. Wow, what else can I tell you? Notes, so many great things. He was 24 when he shot this, incredible. Yeah.
Well,
Went on to do 3 sequels. What were you gonna say?
No, just a couple of the lines of dialogue in the film that were resonant.
Yeah.
Like when he catches his first crook,
Oh, right.
and he plops him down next to the cop and says, "Confession is good for the soul," they say. I'd listen to this man.
Yeah.
And Barry White says, you know, this could be the biggest interview since Moses talked to God.
Exactly right. Yeah. If you hadn't gotten a chance to see it, and you do get rewatch it, I would point you to this scene, the balcony scene, which plays out like a stage play almost, and that was the audition scene for both actors. And those are now available online. You can look these up in YouTube or find them on the DVDs. The screen tests. So the famous screen test where he went in skin and bones and put on a fake uniform, and he's sweating through. You can see the sweat stains and all. And they smeared his hair black with shoe polish, and they had been looking at all these other actors, and then you just see him kind of step up on there with his, and he hadn't figured out all the character stuff, but he had his hands on his hips and goes, "Good evening." And they said they knew in that moment he just had it, the tone.
I thought there was
it's great.
something about forgiveness. At the end, when Superman takes Lex Luthor and Otis to the prison,
Right.
I thought, what about Miss Tessmacher?
Yeah.
And then I thought, even though she had something to do with it, she saved him by taking the kryptonite off of his.
She did.
And I thought, she will get off because he forgave her, and I think the courts will forgive her.
Exactly.
Because she was instrumental in saving California and the whole shop.
Absolutely. Yeah. So there's it's again that kind of Midwestern, but almost also kind of Christ-like ability to go, you know what? And I kind of mentioned this in sermon today, that like sometimes a good deed just needs to be rewarded, and it's okay to, even people you don't agree with or like so much, just go, you know what? You did the right thing.
Right.
So yeah, it's great.
Well,
Guys,
I
I
have
could
to
go on.
reclaim credit for one of my favorite actors in one of my favorite movies.
Yeah.
It's Cary Grant.
Yes.
Not Martin Gabriel.
Oh, it was Cary Grant. I'm sorry. That was a total mistake. I knew it was Cary Grant.
Same initials.
Bringing up baby, yeah. But Reeves said I wanted to make the characters 2 different characters, and that's what did it. Because otherwise, he's just wearing glasses, which is kind of all the other portrayals. But he said if I hunch over, gee, Lois, but you're right. That's Cary Grant from Bringing Up Baby, not Clark Gable. Forgive me, cinema gods. All right, I'll let it play out. But thank you all. This was great. Have a good one.